make, especially when you're first learning how to use those things. Oh, I forgot, I extended this class or I created an interface but forgot to actually add this method onto that interface. And things like that, definitely very helpful.
It's all ready.
Okay.
So if you're ready to go,
Yeah.
you can share your screen.
Okay. Well,
And then
and there we go.
it's just sharing. So that should be good.
Okay,
Can you
cool.
help the other class?
What's that? I went in there.
Not ready?
There's no microphone in there. So there, he's just going to share slides later.
So it is live recording.
Okay, it is recording right now. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so here are a few of the topics that I was thinking about discussing. Zooming in actually makes it smaller. That did not expect that. All right. So I thought maybe we could just look at these few different possibilities. And conveniently, I didn't go into too much detail on some of the object-oriented programming, the OOP structure, like interfaces and services, things like that. This was more about getting into the weeds and comparing it, building something with 7. So I want to do maybe just a quick vote on, just raise your hand of which ones that you're most interested in. Maybe pick the top 3 of these that most interest you. And hopefully you can read those. First one, just building a custom module from scratch. Okay, that's some good hands. Okay, so we'll start with that. Creating a page, just an actual page for that module. That kind of more like a page callback rather than like just creating a node. So most of the things that we're going to talk about today, or everything we're talking about today, is pretty much outside of the node and taxonomy and things like this. Is custom module, custom functionality type. So creating a page and then adding that to the menu, we'll kind of go over that. Using Twig templates for those pages. I know in the theme discussions, they'll actually go into a lot about how to customize Twig templates and how to use those templates. We can just kind of show really quickly how to actually, for your custom page, how to add a Twig template to that. Forms. Much interest in forms a little bit? Okay. So let's start with module. And then we'll get to forms. Blocks, creating a custom block. Okay. Altering existing forms using hooks. Okay. Services. If you're not familiar with D8, then you probably don't know that you want to know about services. But services are a huge part of how Drupal 8 works. So we'll at least cover a little part of that. Actually, I should ask before I get going, how many have done anything in Drupal 8 so far? Okay, it's about half. Any custom development? Okay, that's why you're here. Okay, great. So we'll keep it fairly, we'll start from the beginning. We'll config versus variables. What were variables in Drupal 7 with the variables table and variable get and variable set is now config. We can talk a little bit about that if we have time. And some of the other, so queues, probably more of an advanced topic. Cron tasks, unit tests, I think we're going to talk about testing in another session. We will talk about Drupal console because you can't talk about custom module development in Drupal 8 without talking about Drupal console, or you really miss the boat. Because Drupal 8 there's a lot of scaffolding, there's a lot of files that at first don't make sense. You're like, why is this file buried under source in this certain folder? And Drupal console, you can type a simple command and it'll actually help you create some of those. All right, yes.
So I don't know if this is true for most people, but I've held off on Drupal 8 because a lot of the Drupal 7 knowledge I have gained has been from the Drupal community, from asking questions of all of the community of people out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've kind of held off on Drupal 8 to wait for, I guess, enough people to be able to ask questions. So I walk out of here. Where have you gained the most? What has been the most important sources of information on how to do these things that you're going to demonstrate for Drupal 8? So if when we leave here, we know kind of where else.
I will say that Drupal 8 documentation on Drupal.org is still lacking. There is still not. It's there, but you'll find a lot of topics that say just in notes that needs more explanation or outdated or things like that. Stack Overflow. Basically, I Google 16 different questions a day and typically find the answer within the top 4 or 5 results. It's the same.
Information out there is getting better.
It's getting better. Yes, you do have some blog posts that explain things. You have your typical Drupal shops do publish articles on how to do things. I don't think that has changed much from 7 to 8. There's just not quite as much of it.
There's if you're looking for specific tutorials, there's less on YouTube for Drupal 8, but there's still a lot with Drupal ISV, with build a module. There's a lot of content out there you spend pages.
That's good. Yeah.
I would make is that one of the awesome things about Drupal 8 is that they really made things a lot more consistent. They really are these patterns that are used throughout Drupal 8, and once you recognize the pattern, you know how to use it pretty much everywhere. And so a suggestion I make is look at Drupal core. Look at one of their modules there, and you're probably going to find your answer of how you want to do something. There's probably already a core module that's doing that thing or something very similar. And they've done actually a very good job with their doc blocks of writing comments in there. So look at Drupal core, search around in there, and you can learn a lot about how to do things just by looking at the code that's there.
The other one I would say, along with that, is download the contrib module examples module, because examples module has a ton of sub-modules that explain everything. Not everything, but they go through a lot of the little things that you need to do.
Could you show us
Yeah, like basically it has a bunch of different modules inside of it. So one of the ones I looked at was just one that creates a content there.
Yeah.
Don't look at the one that creates a content.
I know, it's gonna be the word.
I like the examples module. They've done some really good stuff in D6 and D7, and quite frankly, some of the examples they have in D8 are not done very well.
They're not there yet?
I want to learn to do it that way. I mean, I've been super busy. I'm updating that as I have the chance to submit patches to do things, and the one of creating your own content type is seriously lacking. That's an example of one of the examples modules that is not really the greatest way to pattern things out there. So just be a little careful with the examples module now. I mean, this is all volunteer project. I'm not looking to rip on, I'm forgetting his name. Mile 23 is his Nick. I can't remember his actual name. So you can look at the examples module, but for Drupal 8, it's hit or miss.
Okay. So yeah, it is there, and again, go into code, go into Google. You can usually find answers. Feel free to put it on Slack. We have a pretty good group that answers questions on the Drupal Utah Slack. So, all right. So, first thing we talked about, creating a module. Well, so the other thing we can talk about, and I don't know if it makes sense for the limited time. Do you want to see a comparison of how we do something in 7 and then do it in 8? Or you guys have a pretty good understanding of how 7 works, so let's just jump into 8. I see heads nodding, let's just stick with 8. Okay, okay, so let's get in the right place. Yes, I think so. Okay, so do I have a demo? Okay, let's see. All right, so we are now in, let's see, let's start with, so the idea here is we're really going to be walking through, looking a lot at the console and the actual code, and then we'll look at what it does. So starting with Drupal 8, you're going to find out the structure of the files have changed from 6 and 7. We no longer have sites all modules. And I guess you still could, but you just have a modules folder right at the base. Was that so hard? Apparently it was, because it took us a few versions to get here. We have a core folder, which is going to have all of your Drupal core files in it. But we can go right into modules and oops. So I already have a module here created called demo. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new module. And we will very creatively name that demo 2. The easiest way to do that, use Drupal console. I don't have to go in and figure out what everything looks like. I can just go, so the first thing is you're going to have to install Drupal console. It works similar to Drush. There's a good explanation, instructions on how to install that. So I'm going to type in Drupal module, actually, sorry, generate module. Oh, I have to do a composer update. I guess I should have tried this last night, huh? This worked great last time I tried it, but that was you. Sorry, I really should have gone through everything in preparing for this. I gave this same discussion at a Drupal group meeting a couple months ago, and I was planning on running through exactly the same thing. So I did not think to check through everything last night as I prepared for this. So the Drupal console, there's actually a pretty good site that explains. Oh, this is gonna make a problem. Any composer experts that can tell me?
Is Drupal console tied to your Drupal installation, or is it?
No,
It's like Drush.
Yeah.
It's a utility.
It's actually based, well, it's
Oh.
more Symphony console. And there's a lot of overlap between Drupal console and Drush, which I understand.
They had this discussion. I don't think they're ever. Yeah, I think they decided to go with that space.
So it's still an issue.
You know which
So while they're trying to sort this out, answering your question about Drupal console. Drupal console started out in, what's your name? Sure. As Sharon was saying, Drupal console is, Drupal 8's using Symfony. Symfony has this console component. Drupal console was, they came up with their name because they're leveraging Symfony's console, which allows you to build stuff. So the way that Drupal console started out was basically, it was meant to generate boilerplate code for when you wanted to build stuff. I want to build a controller, or I want to build this, or, and so there was this command, and you would do this Drupal, what is it, Drupal generate? Drupal,
Yeah.
Like, I think you say Drupal, honestly, I'm not using Drupal console right now. I'm not even using PHP Storm right now, but I've got no reasons for that. There's nothing against them. It's just, I'm actually building a class on tech publishing mastery Drupal development. I don't want to use things that I don't, but my students can't use. So anyway, Drupal console, so that's why I can't remember what the command is. But Drupal console started off just basically as a tool that you use to generate your boilerplate code so that you can quickly start making your different modules. And you didn't have to remember the whole stuff with PSR and this thing gets broken up into that. You know, it's the routing YAML now, and it's this, and all these different YAML files that you need to have. So you run this Drupal console command, and it would get you all of this scaffolding that you need to do. And then you could basically just go into, doesn't matter, PHP Storm, whatever editor you're using, and you would just modify that. I'm not trying to hijack this, I was trying to actually cover view.
No, that's okay, this is good, it's running, so.
Yeah, you would go in and you would modify that scaffolding to suit your specifics. Because guys, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of patterns that are used throughout Drupal 8 now. So that really leverages things nicely for a tool like Drupal console. It's like, oh, I know what you want to do here, and if you want to do this, you're going to have these basic pieces in place. And I'm a computer, and so I'm really good at generating these pieces for you to use. As long as it's consistent, computers can do it. And so that's what Drupal console was doing in the beginning, is that it was just this type of boilerplate pattern type of stuff that you have to do whenever you want to create this type of a widget. It's like, well, we know the pieces you need to do that, and we'll just get it plopped right in there into the code base for you, and now you can, customize to your particular needs. Well, Drupal console has grown from there. Now it does a lot of the Drupal console grew. It's like, oh, we're going to give you some stuff so you can actually generate some dummy content on your site. And then they said, oh, and we're going to give you some things so that you can actually do some site configuration and site management on your site. So it's grown significantly beyond what it originally started at. Originally, there was pretty much a clear distinction, like, well, why do we need Drush and why do we need Drupal console? And the answer is like, oh, because Drupal console is meant to generate your boilerplate code, and Drush is allowing you to do things like enable and disable modules, and if you're working with, like, I don't like to say the word features, but people, I was subjected to using features in Drupal 7, and I hope not to ever use features again. But features does still exist in Drupal 8, and so Drush gave you the ability to do things like you would manage your features, such as features can't actually ever be managed. You would do that with Drush. And so that was a separation. Drush was sort of a utility that allowed you to deal with your configuration and managing your site, and Drupal console was a thing that allowed you to generate boilerplate code. People asked about, like, well, there was always the question, what's the difference between Drupal console and Drush, and why can't you guys just make one tool? And there really was a lot of discussion around it. And I think there's a little bit of a different philosophy, and there's arguments that they give on both sides about why we can't just turn it into one project and play along nicely with each other. And one of the things that I think the argument that Drush made, it had something to do that, like, we can't have Symfony console be a dependency because we need to be able to do these other types of things. I think that the Drupal console people were pretty open to the idea of let's kind of pull Drush in and we're all doing things together. But the Drush people were kind of feeling like, well, but no, there's some of the things that you're doing that we don't really want to get forced into. So now we have a fair amount of overlap because the two different teams weren't actually able to come together and decide, let's do it this way. And so they did talk about it a lot. There's a lot of discussion, and I don't think there was any animosity about it.
Yeah.
They just kind of reached the point to say, never mind, you go do your thing and we're gonna do our thing. So there's some things that you can do with both Drupal console and with Drush. There's some things that you can do with console that you can't do with Drush. I don't honestly know at this point. Oh, one of the things was like making Drush commands and contributed modules, how they can make their own Drush commands. And I think there is a lot more knowledge and a lot more support of Drush commands. And I don't know if Drupal console has that kind of plug-in capability yet, where you can write your own Drupal console commands that are going to then be integrated with your contributed module. So like if you use something like, let's just say like color box, for instance. There's a Drush command that you use for color box that will then automatically grab the color box jQuery plugin from the site and it's going to put it in your libraries folder, and that's all going to be set up. So you just run this one Drush command. And so there's a lot of contributed modules that are Drush commands. And I don't, like I said, I don't even know if console has that pluggable type of interface yet where you can write your own Drupal console commands.
Synchrony console, it's fairly easy to write plugins for that. So yeah, it's probably there, but what I've seen thus far is that Drupal console's got some great stuff, especially for the boilerplating, right, the templating and scaffolding kind of stuff. And in fact, that's the stuff that Chuck was talking about that's best documented, right? But there's not a lot of effort being put into the other pieces. People keep taking stuff in, but there's not much documentation.
Yeah. And one of the, so I think there's a great discussion about the differences between Drush and Drupal console. So one of the parts of Drupal 8 that is overwhelming, that can be a roadblock for some of us who are not as familiar with command lines and things like that, is this dependency on Composer and Symfony. And luckily, you know, other than the fact that we're having issues right now, it was nice enough when it came up with the error, it said, try these commands. You know, it does give you some ideas, some suggestions on this, you know, you don't have this set up properly, try this. And hopefully that actually did something. This is going to be a pretty short discussion if we don't have Drupal console.
So this thing here, trying to live code is always a challenging thing to do in a presentation.
Yeah.
Trying to live code in Drupal 8 is going to be very much more challenging without using something like Drupal console or PHP Storm. Not because Drupal 8 is actually hard. I think Drupal 8 is actually, in so many ways, so much easier than Drupal 7. But what makes it harder is that what makes it easier and makes it harder is that things are broken apart into a lot of these discrete pieces. Everything lives in its place. Everything has, you put it in a place, you name it that certain way. But then that means that like you've got to build all those things as opposed to like, okay, Drupal 7, I'm going to have my .info file, and I'm going to have my .module file, and those are the two things that I'm going to use. I don't necessarily even need anything else, and I can write my module. In Drupal 8, it doesn't work that way, particularly when you look at things like, I don't know if you're going to talk about services in this session or not. Services are a huge thing in Drupal 8, and that's pretty much where all your business logic should go. But if you're going to write a service, then you really should write an interface. You shouldn't just write the service. So everything that you do, like there's the little pieces that you need to be able to do. To try to do that in front of you live, it's just a ton of things that would end up happening. So
what we're going to do here is we're going to cheat a little bit. I had a demo environment that I was going to use to set this up. Because the Drupal module was not working, was not properly installed, or something had come up that was not working there, I actually went to my Drupal 8 work environment. So this is, I can show you how Drupal console works. I can show you how the generate code and what the code looks like and all that. Turning that module on and being able to see it on the website, it might be a little trickier. So we'll at least be able to look at some of the things here. So as you know, as I switched to a different Drupal 8 instance and typed in my generate module, it gives me the command, give it a name. So we'll just call that demo. We can just stick with the demo machine name. That's fine. Module path. Description, sure. We'll keep it in custom. Core. Yes, I would like a .module file. In Drupal 8, a .module file is optional. You don't even need it. You could have a .info YAML file and have services, and that could be your entire module. It is a slightly different paradigm shift from 7. We do not need a feature, and we do want a composer JSON file. Dependencies we'll leave out, and we'll skip the unit test for a limited time. We'll create a themable template. We'll just look at it really quick. So as I just clicked enter 5, 6 times, I now have 5 files generated. Are you guys, is that still too small? Okay. So now we can see we have that .info.yaml file, our .module file, which we would put functionality in. Like was mentioned before, you put your business logic typically in services, because that service can then be called by other modules, and it can, you have the ability. I think what we would have in 7 used include files to create these different functions that could be used elsewhere. That's the paradigm shift here. So we have a .module file. We can put our hooks basically in there, and that's what you're going to put in. You still have a hook theme, a hook menu. No, you don't have a hook menu.
Hook help.
Hook help.
Hook form alters.
Yeah, the alters, things like that. That's where you're going to put in your .module file. And then we also created a template file. So let's actually jump over to our code. Now we need to find out where that got created. Okay, so I can't pinch my file list, so I can't make that, I can't zoom in on that. So it may be very difficult to read, impossible to read. But I'll go ahead and we'll just open up these files. So here's our .module file, and it created, like we mentioned, a hook help and a hook theme, because we created a template file as well. So there are still some lingering hooks in there that haven't gone away. But right now we have a module that we can install. It's created, it is not installed. We have not run the command to install it, but we can. So we'll cross that one off the list. We have a module created, and now we can go in and add our logic. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a page. Well, a page can be it can be anything. What we typically would do, what you're going to want to do is create a route for a page. So a route, what we think in Drupal 7 as a path, or you create a node and you give it a path to that page, or you do a page callback in the 7 menu, hook menu. Well, what we're going to do is we have basically our Drupal 8 routing system, which are in YAML files. We're going to go back to Drupal console because we don't need to type that ourselves. So let's jump back to the terminal. And we're going to go Drupal generate. And trying to remember if it's generate page or generate route.
Real quick, is there say notification on your screen you can look there, just so it's on our processes?
Oh, this right.
It's no big deal.
Maybe I can put it someplace else. Oh, there is a hide button. I could read it and then, thanks. Okay, is that better? Yeah. So the other thing we do frequently is we go to documentation on the internet. So Drupal console has its own site that has some pretty good, very basic, but decent explanation of instruction, of the different commands available. So here we go. So what we're looking for, and I can zoom in on this. So these are our different commands for Drupal console. Here are some of our generate options. Like was mentioned, sorry, what was your name? I didn't catch your name. Mark, okay. So what Mark had mentioned, a lot of boilerplate type stuff that we can create. Controllers, that's actually the command we want. So we're gonna wanna create a route, we have introduced this concept of a controller. The controller basically controls what, our path. I won't go into the whole concept of the MVC, but so we'll actually go create a controller. We'll kind of walk through really quick. So some of the other options that we can see here, we can generate forms, we can generate entities. Drupal 8 is very heavy on entities. Config entities, content entities, node is an entity, taxonomy, users, files, all of these things are entities, which is very helpful going back to that concept of consistency. I know how to get the ID of any entity. I know how to get, entity types and how to pull those things up because they're all very similar. So here we can generate plugin, we can generate a block, we can generate fields, and image formatters, and all kinds of different actions that we can, plugins that we can create. We can generate a service, which we'll do really quickly just to show kind of what the structure of a service. All right, okay, so that's pretty much the generate options. Let's go back. And so what we want to create this page, we are going to create a controller. So a controller is simply the logic for rendering a page. And then the route to get to that controller, to get to that logic, is going to be handled in the route YAML file. So let's go ahead and we'll add this controller to our demo module. We're going to call it demo controller. And we'll just call it start. I don't remember what the action method name versus the method title difference is. And so we'll just give it a route path of demo. And you'll see in the parentheses or in the brackets there at the bottom, there's the suggested, the kind of the example route. They have something in curly braces. That's how you pass in variables from your URL into your controllers. You can pass in or you can pass in IDs to entities, or you can just pass in a literal string or number or something like that that you can use. We'll, for simplicity's sake, we'll just keep this a simple route. And we'll just stick with that one. You can see the Drupal console really wants you to create unit tests. It's a good idea. We're not doing it here, but it's a good idea. Let's load a couple services just so we can show how they work. We're going to do the entity type manager. We're going to do the, I don't know, the database. All that good. And we'll see exactly how those get added in. All right, so we had 2 more files generated. We have our controller.php, our demo controller. You'll notice the path. The path, it does not put anything directly in the module folder because there is, as Mark mentioned, something called PSR. And it's basically a folder structure. It's an idea of how to auto-load and how to find files based on their location. That's a really simple way of explaining that, but I think that's my very basic understanding of how it works. So you do have to have these files in the right place for them to be auto-loaded and picked up. So we have a controller, demo controller.php, and then it also wrote in our module root demo.routing.yaml. So let's go ahead and let's start there. Let's jump into that file and see what it did. So this is just a YAML file. That basically, gave an ID, it gave us the path and some defaults. Required, permissions. The controller, basically, when I find this path, where do I go? So our controller obviously points to the controller we just created. The controller class, demo controller, and the actual method within that class, start. Oh, and then my title. So go ahead and save that. And then, so one interesting thing is, I just changed this YAML file, changed the title to it. If this module was enabled and I went and looked at it, I would not see that change. It's saved, but it's cached. Drupal caches heavily, Drupal 8. And for a very good reason, because this is very heavy stuff. When you're in development, you can turn some of that cache off, you can't turn it all off. So that's when you get into Drupal or Drush or whatever you use to clear your cache. You're going to do that frequently.
Isn't this
Sure.
also using, you need to stage your changes? Like, it's in staging now, you need to.
It's not just the cache.
It's not just.
Oh, okay,
The
well.
YAML files are parsed, and then they're actually put into the database. So that's the other thing that you run into. It's not strictly a matter, but it's this cache.
Okay, yes.
This is a YAML
Better.
file that's got, a lot of your configuration is set up in your YAML files, but that's just files that sit on your server. So something actually has to parse those files, and then it still actually gets sucked into the database itself. So that then the stuff in the database can end up being cached, but if it hasn't been parsed and put into the database, clearing your cache 17 times is going to make it magically.
Right, and I guess I always think of it as cached because I know that going in and clearing my cache will refresh these things. But there are some config that is beyond that, doesn't get.
That's more of a question. So this is with the module, it's not, you don't have to stage the module changes in order to see them. You just need to put a cache so you'll see them.
I think sometimes you need to visit the extend page first. That's what I'm saying. I always just have to have it. I always visit the extend page before I clear my cache. I never want to remember when do you need to do it, when do you not need to do it. And so it's just one extra step that I do. Is like,
Yeah.
The modules extend, because then that gets Drupal to re-scan things, and it'll actually rebuild certain things, and then you clear the cache. So honestly, I don't know whether clearing the cache alone picks this up in Drupal 8, because I'm just so used to from Drupal 8.
Yeah.
Always go to
And
extend.
so for certain cases, like working into a route file, I know that the cache refresh does work. But there are other YAML files where that doesn't work. There are YAML files that are config files that you actually have to uninstall and reinstall the module if you're making changes to that YAML file, because it only gets loaded once. It gets loaded on module install. And there's not an easy way to do that another way. So at least as far as I'm aware, the controller is one of those that you can refresh. The things like changes to some of the hooks, like the hook theme and things like that, you also do a refresh, and that will clear the cache and reload those. So we have our router file. It's pointing, giving us a path, and it's pointing to our controller. Let's go ahead and open our controller. Okay, so here we have the first thing. If you're not familiar with classes and how that works, I won't go into great detail of this, but you have a namespace. In this case, it is in most module development and things like that, you're going to have Drupal / your module name / wherever you are in that module, which is going to be under the source directory. In this case, we're in the controller. So this would be the same for a form or an entity. You just replace controller with whatever structure, whatever file you're in. So the boilerplate, it gave us a few use statements that we didn't have to figure out ourselves. It also gave us the wrong connection file, but that's.
I was just looking at it, like, I was looking at something, I was like, that doesn't look so cool that it did the use with the MySQL.
Yeah.
I think that's what we really.
Yeah.
Just looking at that right now.
So what we want is actually that connection file, which is not specific to MySQL. It's actually the generic database connection file. But that is a Drupal console mishap. So here we have our class. It extends the controller base. That's basically how this controller is being found. We have our different services that we've included in here. Entity type manager and database. And those are actually being, we'll get in here. So we have a constructor that is passing in entity type manager and our database connection. These are services that we're pulling from Drupal core. This is how we're interacting with everything else. And this is, when we create a service, this is how other modules are going to interact with our module, is through these services. So the question is, who's calling this constructor, and how, why is that being passed in there? Well, there's this great magic method in there called create. And create basically calls your constructor. And so you tell it what services you want to pass in on page load, or specifically on when this method or the class is called, and it's going to pass in those services. So again, this is one of those things where it's great that Drupal console wrote the code for me, because it's a pain to remember exactly how this all works. So you have to have a container interface. That container calls your services. So if you remember, when I created the module, I told it that I wanted the entity type manager and the database. Well, this is exactly what it did with those. It created these two containers, yes.
As long as you've got the Drush console installed. Because I would imagine people are curious, like, well, how did you know the service that you wanted to get there? And Drupal console will actually show you the services. So could you show us really quickly how to use Drupal console so that it'll do its magic and show us what services are available in Drupal?
So do you know how to get that list?
I'm pretty sure there's a command that you run that just says, it gives you this whole listing of services. If you go back to the docs,
Just do a Drupal, right, for the console and then type the grep for services.
Sorry, what was that? So
And then type the grep services. Dash I, do it that, yeah.
okay, sorry, I'm not a grep.
No, you're okay. Dash I,
Okay.
case of use, right? So go ahead and hit enter, and that should give us.
meanwhile, I'll Google that to find out. I know that Drupal console actually has a thing where it'll
And Drupal.org has a services, I think it's API services PHP or something like that, that lists all the core services available. I had just picked 2 off the top of my head because those are the 2 that I use in everything. So again, you can find that on Google. I won't go too far into how many or what services there are, but there's a service for everything. You want to use a UUID, there's a service for that. You want to pull in, where this file is being used, what module. Well, if it's in the database, there's probably a service that helps you get that information, all that kind of thing.
So with Drupal 7, we would use different hooks like node add or node whatever to manipulate and use Drupal methods to programmatically create content or to create a content type or something. We would use hooks. So now, if say we were writing a custom module to create a content type, we would use several services related to entity management.
Yeah, so there's the entity type manager where you are going to be able to call until you're in Drupal 8, your node is your entity, and then they have bundles, which is actually the same as 7, they just kind of mask it better, or your different content types of nodes. We can actually, this is where I don't have too much experience because I haven't used nodes a lot in my Drupal 8 development. But you can create an entity, and this is one of those paradigm shifts from 7 to 8. 7, everything's a node. You have anywhere from a page to an article to a listing of something. They're all nodes. In 8, you can have separate entities for all of those so that they don't all end up in the same database table. So that you can actually separate things and have an articles entity as well as a map location listing entity, and they don't all have to kind of be shoved into the same node bucket.
it might be Drupal container debug.
That gives that list?
They have a list of the services.
Okay.
So the cheat sheet says displays the current sources for an application.
Yeah, but this is our application. Drupal.
Colon debug?
Yeah, Drupal container.
So we'll see. Sometimes Drupal is the Drupal console is a little slow.
I have a
Yeah.
question about that. I've been trying to build a custom module to create a content type in Drupal 7, and then I'm going to do it in Drupal 8 after. When we list the bundle, sometimes I see it the same name as the content type that I'm creating. Is it supposed to be the same, or is it supposed to be different, or either way?
So if you are creating an entity, a content type, I think the bundle is by default the same, and then you can change it if you want to add more bundles to that same entity, or something like that. You can change that.
Okay.
I think that would be correct. So.
Sorry, they are talking about, they're not considering Drupal the application at that point. So
Oh.
the services they're not showing, the services are not.
Got it. Okay, well, that's okay. I mean, it's out there. It's actually on Drupal.org. You can find a list of services available. So now that we have passed these into our class, we can now use this entity type manager to pull up. We can specify, okay, I want to load files, or I want to load users, and I want to, here's the UID. There's some good functions, there's some good methods on that entity type manager that give you a lot of functionality. And again, the great thing about using entities and in Drupal 8 is this consistency. There's a load by properties. And so I know that if I have an entity and it has a column in the database, a property, then I can do a load by properties and say, you know, find me all the users that have, you know, that are inactive or that were created during this range or something like that. And those are the services that we use. So going down this is our controller. We have the start method. The start method obviously is nothing because we haven't put anything in it. This is where our code would be. Another change from 7 to 8. In 7, you could have a page callback, and you would return pretty much whatever you wanted. You could return a render array, and that was great, and it would get rendered. But you could also return a string, and then it would render that. You could, you know, compile your HTML and render that string. In Drupal 8, you can't do that. It needs to be a render array.
How do you return something like a JSON? Like how do you return an AJAX?
So there is a response class, and that response class you can actually return. You can do a JSON return and things like that. You can get a little more creative.
Rather than having it be rendered inside of
Exactly.
the environment.
Yeah.
What's your reason that you want to return JSON? Are you trying to create a REST service?
I'm just contemplating some of the things that we've done in the past where we've saved items through AJAX and saving those items, or
Yeah. So there are.
Because you're probably not going to be doing that with the controller in that situation. You're not going to have a page. He's building a page right now, and he's doing the controller.
Right.
And so if you need to give it that the JSON response to something, it's probably not going to be the controller. Deal with those
Yeah. So there are other ways that you can do the web services, REST services.
Yeah.
Yes. You can very well do it through a controller. Like you would rendering a page. That's probably not the right way to do it. Like everything in Drupal, there's lots of ways to do everything. And some are right, some are wrong. And some are just right there in the middle. So you could, let's say you want to return a page that has just a hello world. Basically, you have your render array. You're just going to say, my type is just going to be markup. I just want string. And my T function is now embedded into this controller. So I can use this T. And then I'm going to say, hello world. And of course, at that point, I can also tie in a template file. I can tie in, I can pull data. I can use those great services that I've written and that other people have written, and pull data from other places and gather that all together in a lovely, in the controller, gather all my data and then spit it out that way in that render array. Any questions on the controller and how that works? Yes.
I guess I'm still pretty new to controllers and that whole kind of mindset. Is there a specific tutorial or resource online that you recommend in getting up to speed with understanding, like, how to decide how, like, even if you would use a controller or not, or everything.
Yeah, so actually I'm open to suggestions here for those of you, because I can't remember off the top of my head. Drupal.org has some explanations of what a controller is and what these different things are. The Symfony documentation has will explain what a controller is and some of these other elements that we use. Any other thoughts?
We're talking about is the standards model view controller mentality. Right?
Yeah.
So there's really anything that talks about MVC would explain what controllers are for, what models are for, what users.
Right.
Simply follows all of those conventions.
Okay,
So now
that's a good point. Yeah.
So it didn't, right? That was not what it did before, but now it's replaced.
Okay.
And it enforces it nicely with the Drupal console, right? Because it gives you all of those things.
And also once you start looking at stuff, and again, going back to look at something in core that's doing something similar to what you want. When I go to the watchdog report, like how is this page being built? So go into the DB log module, see the DB log module. It's like, oh, this is where I put it. So one of the things that's different between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 as well, is we had used the form API for building forms and for building pages. And we would, a lot of times you could use like Drupal get page, and then your page callback would be the argument to Drupal get page, but we still use the form API and we were to return this thing here. In Drupal 8, there's a distinction between a form and page. So kind of answer your question, controllers are basically in charge of displaying pages.
Pages, right.
Anytime that you're going to print some output for somebody just to look at,
Or
it's
blocks?
a block is a plugin.
Yeah. So, and that's the distinction, because Drupal has always had that distinction between a block and a page.
Yeah.
So a page is a controller. Nodes, even though you're not writing that controller, they're going through a controller. Blocks are plugins. Plugin is something we don't have time to go into because it's fairly complex, but there are various types of plugins that you can create. I think block's probably one of the most common ones. But it is what the name suggests. It's plug and play type of thing you drop in there. But the other, if you want to create a form, it's going to have a routing. It's going to show up in your route YAML file, and it's going to point to a form class, and that form class is going to render your form, and it's going to have a build form and a submit form and a validate form method, and then all those things are going to handle everything for you. Again, type it in Drupal console. Let's do that real quick, because that is, yeah.
Controller base is what gives you the methods that you're going to be writing if you don't like the default here. And then there's also a config form base. So if you're writing a module that needs it, and I'm starting to call it a project because I don't want to call it module anymore since we don't really need the dot module. We used to call everything modules before because everything went in the dot module. But now we don't do that. So I don't know what we're supposed to call it. I'm like trying to think about
and it's not.
Or even calling it a library. Even think it's like we're just writing our own libraries that are used in the application. That you're creating, you might display a page, you might display a form, and that project might have its own configuration form, and that's actually a config form base. That's again the thing that makes Drupal 8 so much better, and that also kind of makes it when you're first looking at it so much harder. Because things are really broken out in so much more kind of like discrete and logical and consistent ways now. You aren't like using like hook menu is used for so many different things before. So much of it was loaded into the menu. If we got used to doing it, we never complained about it. Or maybe people like me who've grown up doing web development, Drupal, I just did whatever they told me to do. Like that's how it's happy. You really lose some other stuff based on other experience. we get really frustrated with something that Drupal did something. It's like, this is crazy. You have all these things that are happening in this one place. That Drupal is much better about separating it. One of the things that separated is there's a difference between a page, there's a difference between a form, and your configuration form. They all extend different bases. And I actually think the form and the configuration form both go under source form. I think those are actually in the same namespace.
Yeah.
But a page is actually supposed to go under the source controller namespace.
I went ahead, while we were talking, I just went ahead and added a form. And unfortunately, I really wish we could zoom in the file structure, but rather under source, rather than, there's a folder for controller, and there's now a folder for form. And under that form, there's a default form.php. And I'll go ahead and zoom in here. Same thing, namespace, uses, use classes. Here's my class. Extends the form base rather than the controller base. I have my form ID, build form. So I went ahead and in the command line from Drupal console, I could add fields, or the different form fields. So I went ahead and added a text field, included this. It asked me all of these configurations. So it even included my submit and return. If this module turned on, I could go to the page that was, it also added in the routing file, YAML, it also added an entry. So now it has a path, and the form class, and title, and access, and all that stuff is defined here. And I could go in and fill out this form. And when I click submit, it would return a message from the submit form. So here I just drop in my logic, and the form's created. Really nice, really easy. You don't have to figure out, okay, now where's the best place for me to put this? Is it in the .module file that's already 3,000 lines long, and it's really hard to find anything, or do I have to create an ink folder and put my includes there? And how am I going to organize this? There's only one right place for it to be.
Because you started with Drupal console.
Well, because Drupal 8 requires that forms go in under the source directory, in the form directory, and have their own class.
So
And that
there is no other way. You don't have to do it with Drupal console, but you do
Exactly.
have to write the right files and put them in the right
Yeah, you write it by hand. That's what Mark was saying. He doesn't use Drupal console. He's not using it right now. You can write the files yourself. You can copy existing files and things like that. And, all that's fine as long as the file's in the right folder. That structure is important.
ESR and its recommendations.
Yeah.
Drupal is utilizing the ESR.
And I don't remember if it's 0 or 4 or 8 or which one they're for. Is that the one they? So, so there you have building a form. Yes.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around, hopefully it's okay, I'm asking lots of questions.
No, that's the point.
Where everything goes. So the mod.module folder or file could not be used at all, or it could be used for hooks. We
Right.
still can use hooks.
Yes. Certain hooks. I mean, you'll have to go through the API and figure out which ones are still there.
Yeah. And then if we're extending anything like a form or controller, we can extend the core controller.
Base classes, yeah.
Yeah, base classes, things. And then those go in their own directories, each of them.
Yeah, so anything that is being auto-loaded through the plugins, controllers, entities, they fall into your source directory. And so you're going to have a source directory in your modules, in your module directory, SRC, and that's where you're going to have your namespace. So let's at the top of this one, this namespace is Drupal demo form. Well, Drupals are base That's for the entire project. Demo is our module. And form is the directory underneath, within the source directory. So for our controller, it's actually Drupal demo controller. And we're going to have that directory available. That's where our controllers are going to go. Same with plugins, same with everything. We wrapping it up? Okay. Well, I'm glad we actually had an extra half hour because of our technical difficulties. So I would say to wrap up, let's your questions on Slack if you can't find the answers on Google and anywhere else. But don't be afraid of Drupal 8. It just takes some getting used to. It is definitely a paradigm shift, but I've been very happy with it once I've gotten into it and got past the initial hurdles. You have to get used to it. It's not like anything, unless you've done a lot of object-oriented programming in other languages, or it's going to be a fairly unfamiliar start. But once you get into it, it actually works really well.
You're pretty happy with where it's at. You're not afraid that a module you develop be updated or changed if they make you're pretty happy with the code base that Drupal 8 is fairly stable now.
I've never felt that Drupal is stable, ever. But we use it.
Yeah.
Yes, but no, and the direction of Drupal is going with their module development in the fact that core is being updated and things are being deprecated, and you can stay up on top of that. And there's not going to be this monumental shift from 8 to 9. And they're letting you know a fantastic thing to mention about using PHP Storm. If you use the coding styles from Drupal, it'll tell you, hey, this class that you're using, this service or whatever it is deprecated. And you can then figure out, okay, what am I supposed to be using? So I can write code going to last. There's a very popular example. There's a popular class in there called Entity Manager. It's used throughout core, throughout a lot of contrib. It was early on in 8. It was the main entity manager, and then they came out with Entity Type Manager and deprecated Entity Manager. And if you didn't know that, then you'd be writing all this code that you would have to then change as we get into 9, and those deprecations are actually going away. Thank you for coming, and I apologize. I'm glad we had the extra time, but I apologize for the technical difficulties, and just keep asking questions. Get in there.